Manin Rudich was born in Susuriel, Romania. His peers describe him as a very emotional person. He appears younger than his actual age at the time of this interview, which was 71 years old. He talks about the Holocaust without sadness. Instead, he tells his story as if he was just telling a regular memory from the past. He is a very passionate and dedicated individual, especially about his Holocaust experience. Manin's father, Jakub Rudich, was born in Cernăuți, Romania. He later moved to Susuriel for work with his wife, Gusta Rudich. There, Gusta gave birth to Manin and his older sister. He describes pre-Holocaust Susuriel as a beautiful, thriving town with a lot of Jews and two gorgeous synagogues. In late 1939, many Jews were brought to Susuriel from Transylvania. Manin quickly realized that these were forced workers. He says in the interview that he could, quote, feel the war approaching. Shortly after, in the summer of 1940, the Russians came to Susuriel and took over the town. Manin vividly recalls how the Russians came at night and how he felt very, very frightened and unsure of the future. Russia took over their town, and Manin immediately began learning Russian in school for half of every day. While this seemed bad originally, Manin said that this helped him much later in the war. When he was deported, it became very important that he knew how to speak Russian. A year later, in 1941, the Nazis came and took over the town. One of Manin's cousins and aunt and an uncle of his were killed. His family hid in their next-door neighbor's house. They went there with only the clothes on their body because they knew they had to move extremely quickly. They ended up sleeping in their neighbor's garden, behind a few berry bushes. They slept there with only a few blankets. Manin recalls not being able to sleep that night because he couldn't stop crying. The following morning, all Jews of Susuriel were asked to go to City Hall and have their names taken down. At City Hall, the Jews were ordered to get in line and begin marching to Transnistria. Many Jews died on this march, either by being shot, starvation, or disease. They finally reached their destination after 3 months of marching. Their destination? Snitkov, a ghetto, where all of these people would be staying. Conditions in the ghetto were horrific. One day in late 1941, Manin finally had enough. He decided to crawl under the barbed wire of the ghetto and went into town. He went to the first house he saw, and there he was greeted by a Ukrainian woman. Manin begged the woman for something to eat, and she graciously invited him inside. She got him a mug of warm milk and a few slices of bread. In the interview, Manin recalls crying, and he couldn't stop eating and drinking. Her name was Irina Petrovna, and she told Manin to come back. She gave him bread and cheese and wrapped it in a newspaper for him to give to the rest of his family. He went back to give the food to his family, who were very worried and unsure of where Manin had gone. They had no idea he left the ghetto. His parents were ecstatic to see the food, but they told him he was not allowed to go back to Irina because they were afraid he would get caught. Manin did it anyways. He went back twice after that, once where Irina gave him food, a coat, and boots for winter, and the other where he just got more food. However, he didn't go back after that because he got sick with typhoid fever. Even though he was sick, Manin said, quote, I wasn't afraid of dying. I had seen death too many times, and I knew it didn't hurt, because most people usually died silently. Then, the miraculous happened. Irina showed up in the ghetto after bribing security to let her in. She came weekly for about a month and a half with food and milk, and nursed Manin back to health. She also offered him a job in the spring to graze her cow. This was extremely important because it allowed him to have his name on the list of people allowed to leave the ghetto. Now, the Rudich family had it better than most. On top of Manin's job, his father, Jakub Rudich, worked as a translator for the colonel of the military ghetto because he knew Ukrainian and German. This allowed the Snitkov ghetto military to trust their family, and they were given extra bread periodically. One day, the military lined up the people of the ghetto in 2 rows. The old and the very young were to be killed, and the young and strong were to be sent off to work. Manin was put in the row to be killed. But the colonel saw this and had to keep him alive because he would lose the trust of his translator, Manin's father, who he needed desperately. He also wanted to keep Manin alive to use him as a spy to get information on the partisans in the near forests. The Germans ended up killing all people of both rows, except for the Rudich family. That day, the population of the Snitkov ghetto went from 1,200 to 4. After being transported to another ghetto and living there for 2 years, the Holocaust finally ended in 1945. The Rudich family returned back to Susuriel, where they found their house completely demolished. Their neighbor saw them, the one who hid them in the garden when the Germans came to their town, and told them he saved one thing from their house. It was a book which had all of his father's debtors written down. People began to pay him the money back that they owed him, which helped the Rudich family restart their lives. The Rudich family decided to stay in Romania. In explaining this decision, Manin says they knew that they were going to have to restart their lives somewhere, and they wanted to do it in a familiar territory. They weren't willing to leave their hometown behind because it was such a big part of their young lives. Life after the war consisted of a lot of soccer and friends for Manin. Manin does not shy away from telling his story because he wants people to know that there actually were a lot of people who helped Jews, including Irina, who Manin says is the only reason why he is still alive today.